Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Stretch Takes. I'm joined again by Tommy Smith, Columbia sports management friend of mine. And, as I joked in the first episode we did, I am basketball teammate, even though we never really played a game together, which is a little frustrating in my opinion.
Soon enough.
In the fall, we got to fix that.
Yeah.
All jokes aside, obviously great to have Tommy back. Thank you so much, Tommy, for making another appearance.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Absolutely. So on this episode, we're going to be talking about the NBA drafts as that is coming on when this episode's being recorded. It's before obviously the draft is happening, but that's going to be in late June. And this draft has I think some Tommy, I think we put it in it's not regarded as the best draft, which is that doesn't necessarily mean these players won't pan out to be good players or anything like that, but it's not regarded, at least from articles that I think you and I have both looked at, as or even just media coverage, as the best draft for sure.
Mhm.
So I guess where I want to start things is, you obviously have the two top guys that people project are both international guys that I think would be best described as have a lot of potential, but have also a lot of room to grow in their skill set. Both with how, Zach and Alex, both, obviously they have a lot of really gifted athletic tools. But my characteristic of both of them is that they also are very much high risk, high reward because they have, a lot of things to be good. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on maybe those guys and then maybe some other guys you're looking at in the draft that potentially could be very good, but also maybe some guys you think that are risky to pick as a high draft pick.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like you said, this is definitely seen as a little bit of a weak draft class. I think there was like an anonymous NBA exec who was like, I think the best player in this draft would have been like the 10th overall pick last year, which is kind of a crazy thing to say. But I think regardless, not the strongest draft we've ever had. The last time I can remember like a draft like this was like 2013, I think it was. And I think it was Anthony Bennett's draft, I believe. And like I remember one of the other weak drafts we had, like was a draft that Giannis got drafted in. I think that was one of the last times that um there was like a really weak draft class. And so I think a lot of teams are looking for this like upside. Um, like you said, Sarr is kind of a guy who's projected to be like the first overall pick, I think. Um, I think part of that's with fit with the Hawks kind of like probably moving on from Capella and stuff and probably moving on from one of their guards in the backcourt, and we'll touch on that later, I'm sure. But I think like you said, like it's all about like upside these days. I think teams have just kind of realized like there's no point being stuck in mediocrity, obviously. I think there needs to be swings and misses, and you'd rather swing and miss on a guy with athletic potential to guard some of these other guys. Like you're going to need someone who can guard Wemby, someone who can guard Jokic, like all these big centers. So you might as well take a flyer on a guy like Sarr, who's shown he's a pretty good defender. Like you said, Zach's got a lot of like very good tools as well. He's someone who's just like, I'm not sure exactly how tall he is. I think he's like 6'7", 6'8", maybe. But he's someone who can just like move across the court. Um, and like you said, like international guys have been like, huge in recent years too, and they've seen a lot of success. So I think this is something where athletic tools is going to trump it because there's no significant number one prospect from college these days. Like even last year, like obviously Wemby went one, but like last year we saw like Brandon Miller was kind of that guy who might have gone one in a lot of other drafts, and he was being talked about going as low as three. We didn't really have a guy like that in college basketball this year who was clearly like at the top of his game, clearly was going to develop well. Um, and even him, there were some questions about, and he's been great for the Hornets. Like one of my roommates is a Hornets fan, has just been talking my ear off about how great he'd been for them all season. So this year, I think is definitely a step down in terms of overall talent. That doesn't mean there aren't some hidden gems. As a UConn fan, I am a big fan of Donovan Clingan. He's just one of those guys who he needs to become quicker if he wants to succeed in the NBA. He needs to, work on his footwork a bit. Um, but the NBA is in a weird spot where like it seemed like the center position was going away, and now it's as strong as ever. You have guys like Jokic and Embiid are just like top tier players in the NBA. Wemby's taken over, and I think you're going to need defenders who can kind of guard these guys, um, as well as people who are quick enough to kind of switch out to other players. And I think that's where a guy like Clingan's going to need to improve. But I think he's someone who's great on both ends of the floor. We saw his defensive presence was absolutely ridiculous throughout March Madness. Like he just carried that team defensively. There was nothing going on in the paint. Um, and I think so he's someone I want to keep an eye on. I think in the right fit, he could be, someone who would be scary. You can't be relied on to like control an entire offense. But he's someone who would be a great like fit on a team like even like the Rockets, who have a lot of good young scorers. Um, I'd be interested to see how him and Sengun could play together. Um, I think we're seeing two big lineups like that sort of make a comeback. I don't know if it's the best for better or for worse, but I think that could be an interesting fit potentially. But yeah, I'm interested to see a guy like that. As well, we talked about Holland on the G League Ignite. He's someone with a lot of athletic tools. Stats weren't always there, as I know you mentioned earlier. It's just something where you need to kind of look at these people and see how they might fit into your team, see what skills they do have. And, as we mentioned in the previous episode, it's like you want to look at guys like Reed Shepard too, who are guys who kind of are more fundamental and just kind of, Reed Shepard is a guy who just shoots the ball, right? Like that's a guy, he's a guy who can come in, control an offense and just shoot the lights out of the ball. And that's something that can fit in a lot of teams. And I really like Dillingham as well. I think he's someone who his 3-point percentage doesn't like take into account like how good of a shooter he actually is. He was hitting some like ridiculous shots in the games I saw him play back in the regular season. They didn't have a great March Madness run, obviously, but we don't need to talk about that. The Oakland was, that was a fun little tournament run for them. But I think Dillingham honestly has the potential to be one of the best players in this draft. I think his shot creating is like absolutely ridiculous. Like some of the shots he can get off in the paint and just like create his own look is something that not a lot of other teams have. A lot of other players in this draft have. So, I'm excited to kind of see how that goes. Um, I think, a lot of people are talking about Dalton Connect as well. Obviously going up near the top of the draft. I know you mentioned you saw him at 3 in one mock draft. I saw him at 5 in another. Probably a little too high for me. But I think he's a great player who can, shoot the lights out of the ball as well, create his own shot. We saw he can carry an offense at Tennessee. Um, a lot of mock drafts have Next going over guys like Shepard and Dillingham. I think of the three, honestly, I would take a shot on Dillingham before the other two, which is kind of a hot take based on some of the mock drafts I've been seeing. I think Dillingham has the highest upside of the three. He's someone who I would want to take a risk on, and maybe that's just me as someone who would want to take a risk on a draft like this where there's not a lot of sure things. Um, but I think Dillingham is where I'd go. I think he has the highest upside of like the trio of guys like that who kind of were the top in college basketball last year.
It's interesting. I think for me, I got guys who could also be interesting is like Jacoby Walker from Baylor. Now I know he
Mm.
had that horrible free throw shooting game, which is uncharacteristic in their loss to Clemson. But I watching him play, I think he's actually a lot. People think of him more as a shooter, which I would, based on playing against Clemson, like I would say no. And the reason I'm bringing a guy up like that is there's the idea of age being a problem with draft picks, right? In the prime, like you look at a guy like Connect. Connect is obviously very polished, but the question around him has always been like his defensive ability and his age, right? And Dillingham is 19 years old, and I don't think that's a hot take. I think that a lot of teams actually will be willing to bank on that just based on the fact that he has proven that he can take over a game no problem. And the one thing you also can give Calipari credit for is may not be the most successful team recently, at least in NCAA tournament runs. The one thing you can't say about him, though, is that his prospects have generally panned out pretty well in the NBA. I mean, you think about a lot of the guys that he's coached over the years. I know he's at Arkansas now, but Kentucky has had some really good prospects in the NBA. So I don't think that's a bad one. Kind of translating over a little bit, though, I think for me, some of my thoughts are looking at the drafts are obviously, you look at the guys kind of lower down the draft. I think those guys are going to be role players. I think that's kind of what it is. But Clingan's an interesting one. I agree with you in the sense that if he can get a little bit more polished with his footwork, he could be a really good lob threat and blocking shots type of asset to a team. I would never think of him being a guy that's going to average 15, 20 points. I would see him being 8 to 10 points a game guy. But he could be a serviceable rotational big, either starting or coming off the bench.
Right.
And, I think his ability to block shots, he's obviously does a lot of that. I think another guy, though, that could be very interesting, like I said, I had said his field goal percentage was bad, is watching his highlights, at least, I think that Ron Holland has a potential to be very good if he can get
Mm.
his biggest problem, at least when I watched him play, is he just constantly is always off balance on his shot. And even when he goes to the lane, like he's 6'9", very athletic, strong dude. But I think that a lot of that comes with age and that stuff. But I think those are kind of my thoughts. My next question for you is obviously people are looking at a guy like Zach Edey, who's projected to probably be a late first round, early second round draft pick. Some people think he's in the lottery. I don't think he's that at all. But it's not because let's be clear. One of the greatest college players to ever play. I mean,
Everson.
the guy was unbelievable, right? Unstoppable. I mean, Klingon, who I thought he did a great defensive job on him, he still scored 37 against the guy on all post ups. So, what are your thoughts about like my question with is there's two parts is Zach Edey, obviously there's the questions about his lack of mobility and his kind of, in a sense, outdated gameplay, I guess, for this
Right.
modern age. How can he be good in the NBA and how can he produce at a high level? And then what are the major concerns that will not allow him to do that? Like, and then ultimately, I think the third thing is what do you think of Zach Edey and where do you think he's going to be in the NBA? So I think those are the three parts I think with Zach Edey that I'd love for you to discuss.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the tough thing with Edie, it kind of similar to Klingon, is the footwork, right? Like you need, like in this today NBA, like you need someone who can kind of guard serviceably, like not all positions, but you need someone who can like serviceably help on a switch or like drop in coverage and just like have good footwork around the rim to play good defense. I think part of what makes him so successful is that at the college level, he didn't necessarily need as that good like quickness and footwork because, a lot of the players he was either like way bigger than or like was able to keep up with them. But once you get to the NBA, it's going to be a whole different ball game. So I think defensively that's a concern. Um, Offensively, I think he has pretty good vision of the court. Like he was making some good kick out passes to his teammates. That's something he's going to need to improve on. I'm actually like really high on him. I think he's got a ton of potential. Like he's a smart player. Like he's someone who, I feel like a lot of the times he was getting great looks in the post. The one thing that concerns me again is like his quickness because in the NBA today you need to be quick. There's no way around it. And there is a pipeline of players who I guess have not been like the quickest around the perimeter, having success like Jokic. I'm not going to compare Edie and Jokic, obviously, but I think, Edie's someone who could have a lot of success if he was given time to develop in the right system. I think the back of the first round is probably a good spot for him because that's going to get him on a team that like is having some success. I would love him on the Celtics as a Celtics fan. I think that'd be great. I think he's someone who could, give us some minutes off the bench, take some wear and tear off Kristaps and Al, and just, eat up some minutes, give us some post touches, play good defense around the rim. I think he's someone who's getting undervalued because of his, you know, not traditional fit in today's NBA. And I think he's someone that could see a lot of success. I think yeah, I'm honestly really excited to see where he ends up. I think the last time I can remember a player like this who was kind of like great in college and people didn't know where his fit was going to be, honestly, was Draymond Green was one that sticks out to me, is because he was so amazing at Michigan State, but just had like no fit in the NBA as like a 6'9", like kind of like
Yeah.
big bodied guy. And he turns into one of the best defensive players of all time. I think people will undervalue college success sometimes. And I'm not a huge fan of it. So I think you definitely got to take his weaknesses with his strengths. But like we said, he's one of the best college players of all time. Like I'm willing to bet on that in the back half of the first round.
Yeah, I think the one thing you brought up that I would agree with you on in terms of concerns is I would say his footwork, and I think the only issue with him in the post is he does take a little too long to make his
Mhm.
moves because I think his footwork is just not crisp.
Right.
Now, knowing him, he definitely improved a tremendous amount this year compared to even his National Player of the Year, his junior year.
Mhm.
And as a guy who played in the post my career, like I obviously root for guys who were obviously really good in that. And I gave Matt Painter a lot of credit because he was very instrumental in the development of Edie. The only issue is like you look at a guy like Drew Timmy, for example, who was unbelievable in college,
Right.
and he didn't really pan out. He's like now I think playing either in the G League or overseas now.
Mhm.
And that's the only concern. Like the big thing I think is I agree with you on is fits, right? As you go to a team, I think that's already has a winning culture.
Right.
Think back and where he can develop and they, don't necessarily need to play him right away. I think that's actually a really good move. Like the Celtics could be a great fit for him. I think actually the Nuggets could be an interesting fit for him if they want to do that route because him learning from Jokic might be probably one of the best things for his career.
Right.
I will say, a guy that I wanted to also talk about a little bit. There are a couple other guys in the draft I think that are interesting guys to look at, which are Tyler Kolek is one I was looking at a little bit just because people think he's going to be a late first round pick. And obviously, guy that played in the mass system a little bit. And a bunch of my college teammates played against Tyler Kolek. So obviously I know his game very well, and obviously incredible player in college. Just his vision is ridiculous, and he can score at all three levels. The only concern I have for him, obviously, is just, can he defend in the NBA, right?
Mhm.
Offensively, I actually think he could be pretty effective as a backup point guard because he can create his own shot. But love to kind of hear your thoughts about Kolek and, and maybe you can throw in like a connect like that, like guys who are a little bit more, like I said, older in age, a little bit more like seasoned, but the concern with them obviously is defensively, 100%. So can you talk a little about like Dalton Connect and Tyler Kolek and maybe other guys you think fit in that mold of just kind of the older players that maybe will have struggle maybe on the defensive end?
Yeah, yeah. Funnily enough, I actually also played well, played is a strong word, but my team played against Kolek in high school. I was sitting on the end of the bench and I came in at the end of the game because we were beating them so bad. So that's all I got to say about it. I think he's, obviously had a very successful college career. I followed it from the beginning because obviously at Davidson, we played against George Mason. We were in the same conference as them. That's where he started his career. So he's someone who had a lot of success there, transferred to Marquette with Shaka, found a lot of success, amazing passer, someone who can run an offense. Um, like you said, like defense is a concern. I think shot making is a little bit of concern as well. His 3-point percentage went up this year. I think he's someone who could be a good, like, just a good guy to come off the bench and kind of like run a second unit. Um, I don't know if I see the upside for anything beyond that with him. I think he's someone who, they didn't have much success in March Madness under him. He was a great player in the regular season. Um, he's not one of the guys I would say I'm super high on, but I think he's got a lot of talent. Um, like you said, connect to defense is an issue. He's, a little more of a proven like shot maker. Um, and someone who could kind of maybe fit in the system better because like Kolek's kind of guy who needs like the ball in his hands on offense to make an impact, I feel like. Whereas, Connect's 3-point shooting is gonna like draw defenders to him, and that's a strength in itself. So I think those guys, like, yeah, like the defense might be an issue, but um, I think we'll see. I mean, Kolek was a pretty solid defender in terms of getting steals for a lot of the season. So I'll be interested to see how that translates. I think they could both be. I think Connect probably has a little bit higher upside. Obviously, that's why a lot of teams are mocking him to go, higher in the draft. But I'll be interested to see how both pan out. Another guy who I kind of wanted to mention, who I kind of forgot to mention before, was I really like Cody Williams too. Out of obviously younger brother of Jalen Williams, like out of
Yep.
Colorado, he's a guy who is just like extremely efficient and just like a really smart player, I felt like this year. And he's someone who Colorado, like, didn't have like the most success, but when they were having success, like he was the driving force behind it, like as a freshman too. Um, and he's the kind of guy who I think in the right system, if he could develop, like he's someone who could just be like he's someone who you could get in that 10 to 15 range, who I think could turn out to be the best player in this draft. Um, I like him a lot. And then kind of more of a dark horse guy, who I haven't really who I've really seen a lot over the years just being a Davidson basketball fan is I really like Deron Holmes at Dayton. I think like he is someone who he's killed us year after year, unfortunately. Um, but he's like slightly undersized, probably needs to bulk up a bit, but he's someone who is, I think he has like so much potential. Like he's, super athletic, like, a lot of like rim running dunks, just killed us. He can shoot the ball as well. I think he's someone that could have a role in the NBA as like a power forward. Um, and I think he's going to develop really well. And like he's a guy who's getting mocked to like again like back of the first round. You give him like a few years to develop and like put on a little weight, like he's gonna be an issue. So that's kind of my like dark horse, like back of the first round, early second round candidate who I think is just gonna potentially blow up. I really like Deron Holmes.
Yeah. Those are obviously, good, I think, hidden gems you just just uncovered there. So I like that. Let's talk a little bit about, something that obviously has come to my attention. Something I mentioned to you obviously before we started this episode was everyone talked about how G League Ignite was going to be this next great thing. And I gotta give the G League credit, like that, it was an incredibly smart idea to try and do that and try and
Mhm.
see make it work because a lot of, especially because NIL wasn't a real thing when G League Ignite first started. So they were like, oh, let's put these guys into a professional environment, get coached by guys who are G League coaches, understand the NBA system. The only issue was that their teams were not doing well, and the draft picks weren't really, for the most part, Jalen Green, Kaminga, those guys obviously panned out pretty well. but they weren't like doing as well as I think people expected, right? So the G League has kind of disbanded that team. Do you think that, with that and now with NIL, do you think the whole idea of going like one and done is kind of, in a sense, over because of the fact that you can now make money and I wasn't using that to like critique obviously G League Ignite or the one and done. It's just
Mhm.
now guys can get paid obviously playing college basketball for 4 years. I think that that's really changed obviously how the draft looks and how things look because guys can go to multiple schools, guys can be in college now for a couple of years, and you don't see as
Right.
many guys going one and done or going to G League Ignite, for example, or going overseas. Do you think that the idea of like players not playing in college for multiple years is like kind of over?
Yeah, I think it's over in the sense I don't think you're going to see like, and we haven't seen this for a few years, I guess. You're not going to see one and dones who are like outside like the top 5 to 10. Really, I don't think you're still going to get those top 5 guys. You're still going to get like the Zion Williamson who comes out of college and is going to go first overall after a year. Um, but if you're a guy who's like going to get picked like 15 to 30, like why would you not like come back for a year, develop your game more, get paid as well, um, and just kind of have more time to like work in a system where the system's probably built around you if you're getting picked in that top 10 to 15, 30 range. Whereas if you go on to a team, like if you go on to get drafted, you're just going to kind of be working behind people and trying to get ahead. So I think for a lot of players, the best path might be to take that extra year to develop at college, play to their strengths, like figure out how to capitalize on their, strengths and like figure out their weaknesses as well and just try to find a way to become a better, more well-rounded player while they are at college. You're going to get more reps that way. You're going to get more like actual game time. And like you said, they're getting paid now. And that was a big factor. And also like transfer portal, now that the transfer portal is like not really a thing, there's no more like restrictions. It's just kind of you're going to be able to transfer wherever you want. I think that's going to kill a lot of small colleges like Davidson, unfortunately. It's going to be really hard for us to maintain on to good players, maintain our hold on to good players. But I think it's something that, in terms of as a player, a lot more avenues are open for you to make money and have success rather than just like going to the G League Ignite, which, again, I think the idea was great. It was just tough. You're going against people who played in the NBA a lot of the time. Um, and a lot of those guys had success and then, dropped down. But it's it's tough. Those are like 17, 18-year-old kids going against like people who have already done the whole college circuit for the most part. And that's just, really tough situation to be in. So I think it's a good idea in theory. I think, like you said, the one and done, I think, is on its way out for players who don't get drafted in the top 10. Those top 10 guys will always be going in the top, those top 10 guys will always be going one and done though. Though I don't think that ever is going to change just with the way that pay is structured in the NBA and the opportunity to kind of come in and like be the focal point of a team when you're drafted in that top 5, 10 range. But yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, so with the G League Ignite, obviously, you look at guys that have panned out, Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga, kind of the ones that I think right off
Mhm.
the top. I think with those two guys, though, like Kuminga needed to have a lot of development. Like he's now turned
Right.
into me an excellent NBA player. But I think that it's just interesting to see how that kind of stuff pans out. I guess with that, do you think the problem more with the G League Ignite was just the fact that these guys, even though they're getting good coaching, and being able to be talented players, was it the fact that they were playing against guys who were just more seasoned? Do you think was the reason why they just couldn't get over the hump in terms of winning games? You think that was primarily the reason? Because obviously, like from the G League standpoint, like I thought it was a great idea. I'm like, oh
Mhm.
wow, like you're getting these top level high school guys going to play against grown men for a year. I mean, that's
Yeah.
perfect. But unfortunately, they weren't winning. So I think, do you think it
Right.
was more that like they're just the guys who play in the G League were just more seasoned, and I think that was potentially the problem.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think part of it's also that like a lot of these G League Unite teams, it's a lot of it's a lot of kids. They're young and like they kind of need I think what makes like college teams so successful when you're building off of, like young players is a lot of the best college teams have a good mix of like senior leaders and like people who have like been through the circuit before. Whereas a team like the G League Ignite, you really are just throwing a lot of players into the mix who have like never played like in any professional setting before. Like these are guys who were like dominant in like high school settings, and then you're throwing them all together on a team, competing for time, competing for minutes, and they're kind of, they just kind of get lost out there, I guess, I think. And, it's something where I would love to see kind of how you could maybe develop this idea in the future. Obviously, it didn't work really now, but like you said, I think it's a good idea. It just you're going against people who played in college. You're going against like you're getting ramped up to competition very quickly, and you don't have like the right structure, I don't think, to make it work. Um, so that's kind of my take. I think, it will, it's like you said, a great idea. I don't think the implementation worked at this time. There were some success stories, as you mentioned. I think Jalen Green is gonna be insane. Like I think he's awesome. He's someone who like I really do like the Rockets' future. He like weirdly didn't get a ton of playing time early on this year, and then had like a breakout like week where he scored like 40 points like three times or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah.
Um, I think he's gonna be great. Like you said, Kuminga needed some time to develop, but he's a great player as well. Kind of pretty much the Warriors' future at this point.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know, I think people like that just need time to develop. Like, players right out of high school just need a few years to kind of play in a system, and figure out how to be a part of a team. And I don't think being on the G League Ignite is necessarily the best step for that. Um, Whereas you can come into like a college program that's had success over the years. There's continuity a little bit, unless you're like Calipari's teams, but even those have some continuity. It's like I think there's an important level of having the kind of different experiences on a team rather than just throwing all the same people into the mix.
Yeah, because I think that, obviously when I read the article about, you and I think both agree on this. It's like, it doesn't necessarily mean that they should just go away with this kind of system in the G League, right? I think
Right.
that I get why they did because they're like, look, it's not panning out the way we wanted. But I think that the NBA has started something being like, look, maybe we need to find ways to keep these guys developed for a little bit longer.
Hmm.
Maybe that's going to college, whatever. But I love the idea. It's just like, getting professional experience with something that helped Luka be very successful. It just as a recent example, right? So I think, at the end of the day, with all this stuff, I think I think the big thing with the draft, which I love to hear your thoughts on is just, where these guys end up, how they fit in the system, and how they
Hmm.
get properly developed. I think because since it's a weaker draft, you need to get these guys, I think, able to fit certain roles very effectively.
Right.
Based on the kind of end thought here is what do you think about the draft and what are your kind of ways you think that this draft could end up being successful?
Yeah. Like you said, like I think team fit's a huge part of it. I think there's a lot of guys in this draft who are like have a lot of upside across the board, and we didn't necessarily see that like all fully developed at the college level or beyond. And I think it's important to realize, like you said, like a lot of upside in this draft, but not a ton of like people who are clear cut top players. So fit is going to be huge. Like if you get a guy like Sar who can come in and play for the Hawks as their starting center on day one, that's going to kind of give him the opportunity to develop alongside Trey Young or Dejounte Murray or whoever they keep. Um, and kind of figure out a way to kind of build off of their success, guys who can kind of get him good looks in the post, as well as to focus on his strength, which is being a defensive center. And I think a lot of these players are going to come in with the opportunity to fit a role. If you can bring Dalton Connect into a system where he's, doesn't need to focus too much on anything besides hitting his shots and developing as a playmaker over like a extended period of time, you'll find success. I think he could be an interesting fit to the Pistons at five. I feel like they have a good structure. Obviously, worst team in the NBA last year, but I think they have like some good structure pieces in place where they could use the shooter like him. Um, Got Cunningham and Ivy, and I like Jalen Duren as well. Like this is a team that has a few good young pieces, and he could fit in well there. Where maybe he wouldn't fit in as well on a team like the Rockets, who just has a ton of young wings. Um, I think fit's going to be everything. And I think that's like you got to like recognize like these GMs are going to look for players who fit their teams, fit their roles, and are willing to expand, but also like again like fit is going to be everything in the draft, like you mentioned. There's not a need like another one is like Dillingham. There's not a need for him on the Pistons when you kind of already have two like ball dominant guards, right? And there might be more of a fit for him team like maybe like the Hornets. I guess they got obviously LaMelo would probably take away some minutes. I don't know exactly who would be a great fit for him off the top of my head, but it's someone like the Wizards maybe. I guess you move on from like Poole, maybe Dillingham's a good fit there. Um, it's just all about finding the right kind of place for all of these talents to develop and capitalize on all their strengths.
Well, Tommy, I want to say always a pleasure talking about this stuff with you. This was fun. And, I think it will be interesting to see how these draft picks pan out. So thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah. For everyone listening, another episode of Shred Takes with Tommy Smith, NBA draft preview. We'll see what happens when the draft comes up in late June. And obviously stay tuned for more episodes. Thanks, guys.